Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Daily Word. It's Thursday, June 2nd. It's a beautiful day out. A little cloudy, but it's a beautiful morning this morning. When I got here, I walked around the front and the back of the church, and boy, the roses are gorgeous, and they're blooming, just blooming their heads off. And so it's a beautiful time to look around outside. So glad you could join me for our ongoing conversation about Scripture and what it means for us, and how it might help us as we live our lives. So the scripture that I chose for this morning, this one verse from the book of Romans chapter 8, are probably familiar words for us. If we've heard scripture at all, if we've listened to it at all, they're probably familiar words. And the words that we hear are these. We know that all things work together for the good of those who love God, who are called according to God's purpose. We know that all things work together for the good of those who love God, who are called according to God's purposes. So you know I've been going to therapy forever, physical therapy forever. I don't even know. Julie and I were laughing this morning about the records don't go back far enough. On Tuesday, we were doing our thing, and they have an intern. And so I was introduced to her and talked about my history and what it was like and how long I've been going there and all the struggles that we've been going through. And so she was kind of surprised and kind of mystified, but we're working on it and all the surgeries that I've had. And then she arrived this morning, and we talked more about it, but at the very end, after all the exercises and the stretching, I walked on the treadmill for a bit, and then I got done, and my therapist said, Jim, I just want you to stand on that left leg without holding on. I said, okay. She said, well, just stand by the treadmill so you have something, but don't hold on to anything. And so I stood on my left leg without holding on, which didn't seem like a very long time. And then I did it again for a little bit longer. And she said, see, Jim, look, the very first time I had you do that, you lasted like 2 seconds. She said, now look what you've done. And I got to thinking about that and the struggle with all of that. And we were laughing earlier that I was always going to be going to therapy. I would never graduate, if you will. So I got all done. I always thank them, of course, and walked out and got in my car. And I got to thinking about this scripture and what it means for us. We know that all things work together for the good of those who love God. Paul, in this scripture, kind of treats this scripture as obvious. We know, he says, that all things work together for the good of those who love God. But for me, and maybe for you, it's anything but that. This whole project, this whole life, this whole therapy thing for me, if you will, seems like a whole mess, seems like a waste, seems like a total loss sometimes. Sunday after church, when I was shaking hands, someone came out and said, are you as in much pain as it looks like you are? And I'm like, yep, I'm not acting. Especially by the end of church, I'm in a lot of pain. But the scripture says to us that all things work together for good. But it's interesting to me as we think about what that means for us, that we have to hold on to the promise that even now God is working for us. That somehow in our lives a miracle is underway. And in the fullness of time, it'll be good. I like to think about that in my healing, in my recovery, and in my trying to regain strength. And maybe it's true for you, whatever situations that we go through. They don't have to be physical, of course. There are mental things that are tough emotional things, financial things, struggles with jobs and cars and the price of gas and all the stuff that just jumps at us and continues, to jump at us. Scripture says that we know that all things work together for good for those who love God, who are called according to God's purpose. Sometimes I think for us, as we live our lives, as we meander through these days on our journey together, as we try to figure out what's next for all of us, that we understand that everything, as Paul says, works for the good. We know that it works for the good. And that even now in our lives, even now in our world, even now in our families, even now in our neighborhoods, even now in our church, even now in all the struggles of our lives, God is working in us and through us and around us. And I think one of the struggles that we have with all that is most of the time, we can't see it. We can't see God working because God in us is laying the foundation. God's laying it for us that as we're faithful through our lives, as we try to do what God calls us to do, as we love God and love our neighbor, that God builds a foundation in us, and that all things in time, in God's time, in the fullness of time, work together for good. And I believe that to be true. I really do. It's not I get accused sometimes of having this pie in the sky kind of thing, but I don't believe it's pie in the sky. I really think that in you and in me and in our fellow sisters and brothers in the world, we are inherently good. And that we want to strive to be good. And that we know that we need each other in our lives to make the world a really great place. We just do. Maybe we're afraid. Maybe we think it's going to take too long. I know that we are people who like the instant gratification that happens in our world. But maybe we should pause a bit and lean back into this scripture. We know that all things work together for the good of those who love God. All things. And that even now God's working in you, and even now God's working in me. And I cling to that promise, and I cling to the hope that we're going to figure this out together. And we're going to find ways to be community again. And we're going to find ways to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. And we're going to find ways to band together, to make our communities and our neighborhoods and our towns and our cities and the world a better place. Here's the good news, that while we're impatient, like an aging bottle of wine, God's working in us and through us. And I hope that's good news for you as it is for me, and that we can just cling to that promise. So, that's the short word for today, the scripture that speaks to me in all of our struggles. I hope it speaks to you. I hope you'll hear it and then ponder it and know how it might affect your life. And know that God's building that continued foundation for all of us. And that you'll know of God's love that surrounds you and that guides you in your life, and know of my love for you. And I'll see you tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Have a great day, my friends.